This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Pittsburgh to Scranton, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewald, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined by my co-host, Maura Donnelly. We are going to have a very special topic tonight.
We're in recovery.
What else would we cover, Maura?
Yeah.
The election.
Exactly.
And so to cover the election, we have the two best people in Pennsylvania. We're very fortunate to have with us Charles McElwee, who is the editor of RealClear Politics Pennsylvania, and also a contributor to City Journal out of New York City. And we have Brad Bumsted with us, who is the Harrisburg Bureau Chief for the Caucus and for Lancaster Online. Welcome, gentlemen. We're so happy to have both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Let's start out with Charlie. When you look at the big picture of this election here in the Commonwealth and across the country, what's most surprising to you?
Going into Tuesday, all expectations on the ground were that the Republicans would have a very good week in Pennsylvania. That when you consider the sentiment among so many formerly Democratic regions of Pennsylvania that have trended Republican in recent years, that would help statewide candidates, especially Dr. Oz and his Senate campaign against John Fetterman, but that with Doug Mastriano as a gubernatorial candidate on the Republican side as the exception, that congressional candidates like Jim Bognett to Lisa Scheller, Republicans, would do well. And Tuesday, of course, defied those expectations. If anything, it was a reckoning for the Republican Party, especially in suburbia throughout Pennsylvania. And it was really a rejection of two things. One, of Donald Trump and the Trump era, and this has been indicated in recent years just in suburban Philadelphia, where collar counties, places like Chester County, where Republicans had generations, if not centuries, of control over certain offices, especially courthouses, they had flipped. And this election was confirmation that voters in this region reject Trump, but they also rejected Doug Mastriano's campaign, his excessive campaign compared to Josh Shapiro, the Democratic nominee, who prevailed and ran what was a relatively moderate campaign compared to his opponent. But overall, it was a reckoning for the Republican Party, not just in suburban Philadelphia, but in suburbs throughout the state, whether it was in South Central Pennsylvania, the Lehigh Valley, or outside Reading. If you look everywhere, Republicans performed quite poorly there. But again, for those two reasons, Trump and then the fact that Mastriano was at the top of the ticket.
Same question to you, Brad, if you don't mind. What was most surprising about this election, nationwide or just here in the Commonwealth?
Well, nationwide, to a certain extent, I think there were some reasonable expectations the Republicans would win the Senate by a very close margin. By one vote is really all they needed. But that meant holding Pennsylvania. That meant Oz winning. And that didn't happen. So the fact that that didn't happen, and then how close the U.S. House Republicans are going to take it looks like. NBC projected that today, but it's only going to be by a couple votes. And there had been expectations of up to 30 seats that would change hands to the Republicans,
yes,
which would have given them a huge majority in the House and really much more flexibility and ability to go wherever they wanted in terms of investigations and all that sort of thing. Now, I would think maybe they have to be a little more careful with that, and maybe a little more centrist. I don't think that's going to happen, but that's what would make sense to me after something like that. So that another big takeaway was the margin by which Fetterman won. It looked, based on the polls we saw here, like Oz and Fetterman were neck and neck in the U.S. Senate
That it would
race.
take days to solve that one.
Weeks maybe, to figure that out. And the fact that Fetterman won so well after his debate performance, after he had a stroke 4 days before the primary, he finally agrees to debate after voting has already started in Pennsylvania. And what I heard from a lot of people was, why would his team even allow him to go out there and debate under circumstances where there were strict time periods for answering questions, which is one of the worst things you can do to a recovering stroke victim. Maybe they can answer, but not in 30 seconds.
But it didn't hurt him.
Pressure.
Didn't end up hurting him.
It didn't end up hurting him with the voters, but it was very, very close to doing so. I mean, but in the end, I think what happened is the people who really liked Fetterman weren't bothered by his speech and the things they saw. People who didn't like Fetterman, thought it was terrible. But it's really what was at stake there were independent voters and how they would move. But the needle didn't move on that debate. But it was a dangerous move politically.
How did the Republicans nationally and in Pennsylvania, and Charles, we'll kick it back to you, how did they underestimate the voters? I mean, we talked about Trump. I mean, Trump's been referred to as catastrophic and detrimental and all sorts of words, and people admit it. I was voting against Trump. But how big was the abortion issue? How many other things played in that the Republicans underestimated the voters on?
There are so many things to analyze here. On the issue of abortion, that turned out to be far more of a mobilizing issue than Republicans had anticipated. Steve Santaciero, who's a state senator in Bucks County, he had an interview with the Bucks County Courier-Times, and he noted that even from the Democratic perspective in places throughout suburban Philadelphia, they didn't even fully grasp how big of an issue that became. And the problem for Republicans of Pennsylvania that made that issue particularly unique was that Doug Mastriano took the most extreme position one could take on the issue of abortion. And he took social positions that, if anything, were arguably to the right of, let's say, the average Trump voter in Pennsylvania. People forget that Trump performed quite well in suburban Pennsylvania in 2016. And it was thanks in part to the fact that while he ran an economic populist campaign that resonated with working class regions, he really didn't touch social issues. And we just see in Bucks County alone, for example, Brian Fitzpatrick, a moderate Republican congressman, easily won re-election, but once analysis found that 40,000 voters in Bucks were swing voters. They were voters who voted for Fitzpatrick, voted against Mastriano. And that was a major issue. But separately, Fetterman against Oz, Fetterman ran, in hindsight, what was a perfect campaign. And all the indications were there. He won every county in Pennsylvania in the primary. He vanquished Connor Lamb, who in the past would be considered a blue dog Democrat. And he had an economic populist message that improved his margins in Trump trending areas. And even on the issue of crime, Fetterman narrowly won among voters who consider that a top issue. One exit poll by CNN found that he prevailed over Oz on that issue. And that just shows that when it comes to the suburbs, especially in greater Philadelphia, and I live outside Philadelphia, they understand the reality of crime and disorder in the city of Philadelphia, but they're not there every day. Their morning commute is a distant memory. They're not going into the city. If anything, retailers are coming into the suburbs. They're living this parallel existence. So in hindsight, even the issue of crime did not necessarily work for Republicans in those voter-rich suburban areas.
Well, let's go down through the various elections. We want to go through the U.S. Senate election, and then we want to go through the House elections here in Pennsylvania, the gubernatorial election, and then the state Senate and the state House. So just to cap off the discussion on the U.S. Senate, is when you look at this election between Oz and Fetterman, are we at a point where Pennsylvanians believe that hoodies and tattoos are representative of what is good about Pennsylvania? Or did Oz run such a bad campaign because Fetterman, first of all, seemed to have more money, ran more commercials, but he also said, "I'm one of you." And he stressed that over and over again. And the Oz campaign never seemed to answer the question on residency, and never seemed to take up some of the things that they could have gone to. For example, Fetterman said, we want this, we want this, we want that. We want a strong economy, we want good schools. But they never had any solutions whatsoever. What was going on here?
Well, Fetterman's campaign was really good, but his advertising I thought was spectacular. I mean, he really hit it, from the beginning in terms of Oz being from New Jersey. He's not one of us, implying that I am one of you. Yeah. I mean, just everything, to the point that he had, Oz voting to cut Social Security and Medicare when he said nothing of the sort. But I talked to people who said, well, he wants to, cut Social Security. I said, where do you get that? I know where they got it.
Well, Fetterman had all the dogs that had ever been experimented on in all the hospitals that Oz had ever worked in dying in Oz's lab.
Well, they had that little beagle hanging onto a cage. It was horrible,
How could the Oz campaign be so incompetent not to address this?
They really didn't address that.
And rebut.
They didn't address that. I mean, look, the Oz campaign wasn't bad. Don't get me wrong. But Oz was a flawed candidate to begin with. Even in the primary, the Trump voters didn't like him, and there was just, you had the New Jersey problem, for him coming in, and then he was sort of standoffish to a certain extent, as opposed to Fetterman, who, if he had a wingspan, it would be probably as large as this room, and was, despite his problems, with the hoodie and the shorts. Did convey a sense of being, one of us.
The average Joe.
The average Joe, yeah. And it's unfortunate, but I don't think Oz's campaign was as bad as it looked. It's just Fetterman's was so much better, and Oz had the inherent problems there that he couldn't get away from. But crime is a great example. Why would you possibly think that Fetterman would be better on crime if you care at all about what's going on in the streets? I mean, it's so bad that there was a story in the Inquirer yesterday about Mexican government running an ad against drug use using scenes from Kensington and Philadelphia.
Right.
And that's like, so soon, that was unbelievable. That's how bad it is there. And
that's crazy.
Charlie?
It's true. And Oz came out of the primary battered. It was the most expensive primary in that cycle. David McCormick almost prevailed, but narrowly lost. And Oz went into the general election cycle with that high unfavorability ratings driven by that primary. And he couldn't overcome it. And during the summer, the campaign kind of went silent. There was even one Politico headline at one point that said, "Where is Dr. Oz?" And Fetterman filled that void through a robust digital presence as he recovered from a stroke. And the irony is that Oz probably would have been a centrist, moderate senator in the mold of the traditional U.S. senator that we associate with in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And the kind of senator who would be totally palatable to suburban sensibilities. And that's why Oz painstakingly tried to distance himself from Trump at times and campaigned heavily in suburban Philadelphia. But nevertheless, Trump rallied with Oz before the election, and voters in these regions carry that memory. But even that highly anticipated debate on October 25th, late in the game, at that point, just 2 days before, the Phillies were headed to the World Series. Voters' minds were on baseball, not politics. So many mail-in ballots at that point had been submitted. So many voters had cast their ballots.
How many? Was it about half?
About half, exactly.
Before the
and then don't discount the fact that there was a distribution disagreement between Verizon and Fios and Nexstar that led to a blackout for the stations that carried the debate, including PHL 17 in Philadelphia. And I saw this myself. I tried to watch the debate that night in Roxborough and couldn't access it. We had to scramble and stream. And that was the case for so many voters that night. So if anything, although that debate clearly showed that Fetterman was recovering from his stroke, many voters in hindsight empathized with and gave him credit for showing up, or they just weren't even watching.
And shortly thereafter, I thought this was pretty brilliant. He embraced his stroke. His ad started
That
out
was,
with,
yeah.
Definitely.
"Since I had a stroke," and because I think he realized people were being empathetic to him and understanding that he was in recovery, and it went really well for him from that point on, I
And his
think.
best line of the debate was when challenged why he wouldn't produce his medical records, which I think made you a little suspect with a guy who'd had a stroke. He said, "Transparency is showing up." And it really is. I mean, if you have those, you have some
Doesn't matter what
problems.
the records say.
And I've heard a
Yeah.
number of people say, well, it was courageous for him to go into a debate. I think politically it still was, it was a very risky move, but it did take some guts to do that.
Yep.
Okay, let's take a break here, and we'll be right back after this for the second half of Behind the Headlines.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Welcome back to Behind the Headlines. Maura and I were just covering the results of the midterm elections with Brad and with Charles, and we want to go to the governor's race and start out with you, Brad. Was there any way that Mastriano could have won this gubernatorial race?
Not much. I mean, a very, very slim chance. But if he had moved to the middle, if he had a minimum of $15 million, if he had gotten money from the Republican Governors Association, he might have had a chance. And he had issues, populist type issues that he has espoused in the state Senate, like stopping the pay raise that occurs every year based on inflation for members of the legislature. He has things like that he could have easily put out in ads, but he didn't have any money. He didn't go out anywhere beyond small rural, campgrounds or whatever he did, and he was easily picked apart by Shapiro's people in terms of various stances that he took, or his association with groups like GAB and some others that did have anti-Semitic stances that he was easy to shoot down. So he didn't have much of a chance to begin with. He had zero chance when he did none of these things that a candidate would normally do. But that said, Mastriano in person seems like he's a decent human being. He doesn't seem like when you hear extreme and most dangerous candidate in the country, you go, whoa, do I meet this guy or whatever? But he's not like that. But as a candidate, it was terrible. He's probably the worst Republican candidate Pennsylvania's seen in modern history. I can't think of anybody who's, even if they've crashed, Scott Wagner lost huge to Wolf, but he was a credible loser, save for one incident with
The threat?
with stomping with.
Yes, stomping on somebody's face, yeah.
Right,
Well,
with golf spikes.
Let me ask both of you this question. We could spend all day being like, what if? But there is some talk that, with Shapiro winning as big as he did because Mastriano was so bad, there was the trickle-down effect to the other candidates. What if the Republicans had put up a better candidate? Do you think it would have made a difference across the board? Could they have won?
It had to be a pretty good candidate, because Shapiro was one hell of a good candidate. Excuse me to your viewers, but
Yeah.
he's one of the best politicians I've seen. He has the potential to be in a class with Arlen Specter and Ed Rendell in terms of his instincts, his knowledge. He knows where to be here. When things are moving there, and he's a very, very good politician, and he's a very apt person in terms of running a meeting. I've never seen anybody better at it. He's very, very good and just smart as hell.
Charles, what do you think?
All correct. I mean, Shapiro is extremely disciplined. I mean, this is an incoming governor who will be considered a future presidential prospect on the Democratic side. Democrats are looking to the Shapiro campaign now as the playbook when it comes to how to win. And they had the war chest. They had $65 million against an opponent in Doug Mastriano, who did not engage the press, had limited campaign dollars, and had almost zero visibility on TV. And it was a religiously infused campaign, and Mastriano's campaign was really a lesson in the importance of the separation between church and campaigning. That doesn't work in Pennsylvania. And I went back to newspaper articles after the '06 cycle, interviews with suburban voters that year who punished Rick Santorum. And the quote that I read over and over again, suburban voters who were expressing their disgust with Santorum over his, what they considered extreme social conservative positions. And they punished Santorum that year in places like suburban Philadelphia. Fast forward, we saw that same lesson again, and it was actually Santorum who recently expressed his frustration in a radio interview where he said that Mastriano is running a covert campaign, and covert campaigns rarely win. Santorum was right, but Santorum was also carried the memory of his '06 campaign, and he also had a subsequent career, whether it was that economic populist message that he crafted in 2012 or the book that he wrote about working class populism, that ironically played a crucial role in inspiring Trump's campaign message in 2016, one that led to a narrow victory for Trump that year in Pennsylvania, and one that was not consumed with social concerns.
Well, Charles, have we ever seen anywhere around the country example like Mastriano used at the end of his campaign of using having fast? Was it a 40-day fast? He was going to go on a 40-day fast and prayer cycle to try to infuse his campaign with extra energy and perhaps money. We ever seen that in Pennsylvania or anywhere else before?
I can't think of a precedent.
Since he doesn't talk to us, Charlie, we don't know what type of fast he was on. There's fasting like you're just going to eat, one piece of bread and some fruit a day, a very meager diet. There's fasting where you're not going to have anything to eat all day. You're not going to have
There's
liquids.
giving up alcohol.
There's fasting where you're going to have protein shakes, but no hard food. So we don't know exactly what he did, but when you see him at the end of the campaign, he didn't look any different than he did 40 days before that.
No, he just lost.
But I mean, he didn't look gaunt or sickly in any way. As opposed to the fast that Irish prisoners would have in British prisons and go on hunger strikes. This didn't look like one of those. That's all I can say. But we don't know.
What can the Republicans do to get back into competition in future gubernatorial races, Charles?
So they have to review the map of Pennsylvania, and the 2024 will really confirm whether this was a Trump-driven issue for the GOP, the fact that people are still punishing the Republican Party for the Trump era in places like suburbia. But really, Republicans face two significant trends in Pennsylvania. One, so many parts of Pennsylvania are increasingly suburban. They're driven by eds and meds, employer sectors, places like Harrisburg's East and West Shore, Hershey, that's undergoing this massive residential project projected to add 10 to 15,000 people in the next 10 years. Communities like Wyomissing outside Reading, so many parts of Pennsylvania, you have places that are where the healthcare sector is the primary employer and the professionals moving there are increasingly Democrat. But you also have now Hispanic majority cities, in most cases east of the Susquehanna River, Hazleton, Reading, Allentown. How will they vote in the cycles ahead? Is that a demographic bomb for the GOP? Will those Hispanic voters in those communities vote Democrat, or is that an opportunity for the GOP for pickups? These are all unanswered questions, but 2024 will really indicate to the GOP where things are headed.
One of the things that we heard after this election was various Republican leaders saying, how terrible this was, and that the candidates involved said they didn't want any kind of endorsement from the party. You know, it just sounded so hypocritical. What it was they didn't want to stand up to Trump. They were afraid for fear they'd be tweeted. You know, so they could have easily stepped in and said, no, well, I'm sorry, we're going to do this, and we're going to vote, and we're going to pick the best candidate we can to run. And they didn't do that.
Yeah.
And
They
that
gotta
was
get some guts.
that was a real failure.
Well, I don't want us to lose the opportunity to talk a little bit about the State House. So I want to talk to both of you. What do you think is going to happen, Charles?
Well, they benefited from redistricting. The reapportionment process last year led to redrawn districts that, in certain cases, especially in suburbia, created openings for the Democrats. I live in Radnor Township, for example, represented by Chris Quinn. The redrawn district, even though Quinn is an independent, moderate Republican, he lost. And it was just because of the new composition of that district. And that was a story throughout Pennsylvania. And as a result, we're looking at a scenario where Democrats will have a majority in the state house for the first time since 2010.
Yeah.
And this is the result of the state Supreme Court redrawing these districts. Is that not true?
That's the biggest factor, probably.
Yeah.
And then that is a power that has been removed from the legislature. And this is not only happening, of course, in Pennsylvania, but it's happening all around the country.
Yeah.
And this is a new phenomenon. And it seems to, at this point, so long as if Supreme Courts are, like ours, elected popularly, then this is something that could favor the Democratic Party,
Yeah.
at least here in Pennsylvania. So what can we do about, again, fair redistricting?
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry, maybe I brought up another show.
I mean, you know, the Fair Districts PA wants to change the House rules in terms of how districts are drawn and criteria that's used. But there's this tactic they use, and I won't go into the detail, but they wind up passing a resolution first that prevents amending the second resolution that's put in where you would put districting. So there's that. There's also the debate about whether to move to regional elections of Supreme Court justices. There's the long-held debate about merit selection, which isn't going to happen.
You were right. It could be a whole show.
And we will bring that show to you very soon. We're all out of time for this show. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
There's
Thank you.
way too much material here to cover in one show, but we appreciate your effort to try.
That was great.
And we look forward to joining you again next week here on Behind the Headlines. See you then.